Our speaker, who is actually known as designer, as front-end developer, as a book writer and journalist. Also, he is known as the founder and lead creative editor of Smashing Magazine. Yes, you heard it correctly. Our heartily welcome from sunny Budapest to sunny Berlin to Vitaliy Fridman. Hi, Vitaliy.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hello, hello. What a pleasure it is to see you.
It is a pleasure.
Nice to see you too.
Well, we are doing great. I'm not sure if you had a possibility to see all the talks, but we had a lot of them today. We will be getting more info later. But yeah, we had Java, we had Python, we had all kinds of talks today. How are you doing?
Well, and here I come with some design stuff. Frankly, now just looking at you, I feel like I'm in Eurovision in some way or the other. So
maybe
I feel
you
like
are.
I'm just going to give you now 12 points and we're going to go to another speaker.
Maybe you feel so great because we know how passionately you support Ukraine. I follow personally your Facebook page and I saw all this stuff that you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your support.
Of course, whatever I can do to help. That's very important at this time.
Yeah, also I heard that recently you made a new course. It's Fundamentals of UI, as I remember correctly. There was 100 things about UI.
Yeah, so it's called Smart Interface Design Pattern. This has kind of been an ongoing journey for me for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, where it was kind of a lot of different things that I learned in my project, which I tried to combine in some sort of a video course and kind of share it with everyone as well at this point. And this has a lot of examples. So please, talk to me about this later. I'll be happy to share a link and give a friendly discount as well. It's
That's generous.
It's 7 hours of all kind of stuff in there. So yeah, I mean, this has been a long journey for me, and now I'm really happy to just have it all in one place. It's kind of my personal bookmark. It's all about me in the end. It's just about me.
I see. Well, we are happy that you reached this point of your journey, this destination. And actually, we're happy to have you here with us today.
Super happy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Just one thing I do have to mention. This might look like it's like all kind of little lines here on the shirt, but I ironed it. I promise you. It's very much ironed, and I take a lot of care about ironing. Everybody who knows me knows that I even was so close to actually running workshops in Kiev about ironing. But maybe next time.
We do believe you.
So it is ironed, I promise.
I don't see anything. You look fine.
Yeah, it's always like the camera. It always. I mean, I do care about ironing. Everybody who knows me knows I do. So that's a separate conversation. That's not what we're going to talk about today, though. I promise.
Alrighty.
Okay, then maybe we can proceed to your talk, and the audience is yours.
Yes,
have fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I will, I hope. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. All right, everyone, welcome to the show. Welcome to the world of complex UIs. My world has been anything but fun over the last couple of years. It's been a journey in all kind of environments, and most of the time, because when we're looking back at, the COVID and all the stuff that brought me to a lot of consultancy work. And so over the last two and a half years now, it's been worlds of jQuery. I mean, if I could actually upgrade from an old version of jQuery to a new one, I'd be very happy. But mostly really enterprisey, really corporate, and not like if you have attended kind of any kind of courses or trainings or anything with me, that the world that I realize now exists out there in the enterprise world is very, very different. And I kind of wanted to share some of those things with you in the hope that we all can improve this horrible, outdated legacy world, enterprise world that is not always very well designed. And also, so everyone, by the end of this talk, is going to have a bunch of useful tools, I hope, and techniques in order to be able to deal with any kind of complex issue, be it complex filtering, be it complex data tables, be it complex navigation, and so on. But before we do that, we kind of need to understand what is that complexity in the first place. When I'm talking about complex UIs, it feels like everything is complex. I'm pretty sure that you now watching the stream, you're like, oh, we are working in a very complex environment. And it's very likely that you are, because there are plenty of very, very different and very weird complex environments. So I think that if you just look at this list of the overview of all those little applications and large applications that exist out there, you're probably going to find yourself. Maybe it's a kind of some sort of a CPQ system right here. Maybe it's kind of healthcare system. Maybe it's an information system. Maybe it's a public service. Maybe it's kind of a dashboard that you're working on. And all of them have one thing in common. They have this complexity inherently in them, just because most of the time when we think about complexity, it feels like it's such a, such a kind of thing that's kind of floating there in the air. We cannot really capture it in any way, but I think that we can. Because one thing that makes this interfaces or the systems complex is that, well, there are plenty of fine details that are usually designed for expert users, and they require a knowledge domain. When I was growing up, I was basically just freelancing, and I was doing this project and that project, maybe a conference website, maybe an event website and stuff like that. And now looking back, I really miss this opportunity to learn and work in an outsourcing company, because I don't have the knowledge about some domains with which I have to work. If I look at this domain, right, if I'm just looking at something like this, I have no idea how to start and where to start. This is daunting to me. No, maybe it does not, right? But when I looked at it as something like this in the first time, this is just extremely daunting. What I see now, though, is this kind of slightly more abstract picture of any interface I'm dealing with. So it doesn't matter how complex your interface is. We always need to abstract it away and try to break it down into something that's more manageable. Because what I see right now is not necessarily the teeth, right? I see visual representation of data. There is a lot of data right here. Some data can be manipulated. We can select and pick any particular item in that data set and then do something with it, manipulate it, change it, learn something from it, export it, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of data. We also might have a lot of functions and filters and things like that over here, right? And we potentially would also have something like this, which kind of drill down detail of that particular piece of information. Now, obviously, sometimes it's done well, sometimes not so well. So here, for example, even if you just look at all these little triangles and rectangles, they're supposed to kind of indicate different points of information, different pieces of information, but it's very difficult to decipher them. And the reason why it happens this way is because most of the time when we're designing interfaces, we often kind of have this assumption that, okay, we have this data set, we have that data set, and almost implicitly, all right, we are kind of designing for that data set. But then when data set changes, our design changes as well, and it just doesn't seem to be working anymore, right? But of course, this is just one side of kind of application that we're dealing with. We also get a lot of enterprise products. These are products that are designed to support enterprise roles and organizations. I'm sure that most of you are working in things like that. We basically try to coordinate workflows, tasks, and people. These would be applications like this, or maybe like this, right? Where you have a lot of things, a lot of different views to actually explore the data set and so on and so forth. And you might have a lot of filters, nested filters, literally 60, 70, 80 filters. This is actually quite common in enterprise applications like this. And we'll be dealing with them in just a moment as well, right? So that's, again, very typical, but it's maybe not as daunting as previous examples we had. We just have a lot of views, sorting, search, filtering, those kind of things, and they are everywhere. And sometimes we also get this third type, which is information systems. They are probably the easiest to deal with because we just need to provide a proper information architecture. In the end, what we want to help people to do is to find data or resolve a particular task that they are here to accomplish. This is very typical for public service websites, for any kind of information system website like this, right? This is IRS, an internal revenue system in the US. Right, and you just have a lot of stuff in there, a lot of services that are provided as well. Obviously, you need to be able to apply, you need to be able to register your business and things like that. Kind of a typical information system, just a lot of services, a lot of topics, a lot of navigation as a result of that. And sometimes it's differently visualized. You have these real dependencies between different sections. and kind of navigating through the sections can be very, very difficult as well. But here, unlike in the previous examples, you have to deal with a lot of navigation and allowing people to drive, kind of to go towards the goal in a very predictable way, right? And one of the common ways of dealing with this would be a proper information architecture, like, for example, gov.uk, right? Again, why am I showing all of this? Well, I'm showing all of this just because we need to understand what kind of complexity we're dealing with. We need to understand how to deal with it, because it doesn't matter what kind of system you have, you will end up with this very famous Tesla's law in action: conservation of complexity, where it doesn't matter what you do, the systems always preserve their complexity. We can't remove complexity, it has to be dealt with, right? And the question is, how much technical burden do we put on the user and how much on ourselves? When I come in those organizations, right, large organizations, right now working with European Parliament, when we're kind of trying to move from a navigation system which is scattered all over the place, and there are literally 138 different sites, and all of them have slightly different navigation, and bringing it into one is a significant effort. This is a multi-year project, right? This is a very, very complex issue on its own. However, I can't just come in and say, well, I think that as a designer, right, working with developers, I can't just say, I think that this is better this way, or this is nicer this way, or it should look like this. This is not going to fly. I need to be able to prove that my design works. And that's very important, because very often we kind of tend to think that design is this thing that's out there and it's based on personal kind of subjective preferences. It shouldn't be. Design is supposed to solve a problem, and as such, we then should be able to measure how well a particular design solves a particular problem, and then pick a design that solves that particular problem best. And this brings me to this notion of design KPIs. We often talk about business KPIs. We often talk about performance KPIs. And what I started doing in this kind of environment is talking about design KPIs. And it all boils down to identifying how we can actually define the quality of our design work, right? So what I'm trying to do with design KPIs is kind of make sure that the process of designing or creating anything is driven by two things: by constraints that we have usually coming from the business, and also user-centric goals. And the outcome should be, and this is very important, not kind of a personal taste kind of focused design, but it's an evidence-based design without any random or subjective decisions. And for that, I usually try to keep, again, these two things in mind. I'd like you to keep that in mind. So we have the constraints and we have these user-centric goals, right? Here are some of the useful constraints that I find in my work all the time. This would be, for example, top task completion rates. That means I need to identify for a given product, what are the things that people tend to do most? What are the pieces of information that people tend to search for most? What are sections on the site that people tend to frequent most? And then once I do that, I can measure how much time do they need to complete the task on average. If we can't measure something, we cannot improve it. So we always need to measure. This also goes if you have, let's say, an environment where you have a lot of forms, right? How often do errors happen? And then if they do happen, how quickly do people recover from those errors, right? And then a couple of other things, obviously performance, accessibility. In the context of European Parliament, I think it has to be not just accessible, we also want to have a minimal environmental impact, right? So I need to think about fonts. How many fonts can we afford to stay within the environmental impact budget, right? What about the background color? What about parallax? Can we afford parallax at all if we wanted to? What about infinite scroll? Can we afford that? That's kind of a slightly different level of conversation, but these are different constraints that I'm kind of picking, almost cherry picking, depending on the content in which, or the context in which I live, right, in a particular project. And then based on that, I actually come up with these design KPIs. These are the ones that we kind of ended up with the European Parliament, right? Top task completion rate, top task completion time, time to relevance, whenever somebody wants to find a piece of information, and they actually get it. I will explain in a moment how exactly that works. Frequency of errors, error recovery speed, accuracy of data. That's also very interesting, because very often when you end up on an e-commerce site, you get this newsletter box showing up, right? And they ask you for your email address. But as a business, I don't care just about the number of email addresses that come my way. Right? In my research, I realized that depending on the audience, especially if it's a young audience, you'll have a very high number of people using temporary email addresses, fake email addresses, and so on, just to get the discount code or coupon code, right? We don't care about just the number of email addresses. As a business, we care about the accuracy of those email addresses. We want emails that people check, that have really low bounce rates, that have high opening rates and high engagement rates. And I have to guarantee that. This is, again, something that I need to provide, and I need to prove that I did so, right? I can't just say, let's do it this way or let's do it that way. That's just not going to work. And then a few other things like accessibility and performance. And what you see here, this is kind of the design side of things. But on the right side, I always try to tap into the business KPIs as well and think about, what else do I need to keep in mind here? So we need to reduce service desk inquiries, right? Because it has a cost. We also need to reduce any confusing encounters per visit, because this is probably going to cause a lot of calls in the call center and so on, right? On the publishing side of things, I need to reduce time to publish. And for the developer side of things, I need to reduce maintenance costs, right? And then again, environmental impact. And then also turnaround score is just something I always include, because it tells us if somebody, a customer, a user, a visitor, is dissatisfied or really unhappy with the current experience, right? How much time does it take for our organization, given our tools and our environment, to bring them again to this loyalty level where they're actually a loyal, friendly customer again, right? So all of this is being displayed to designers, to developers, to business analysts, to managers everywhere, just to make sure that these KPIs are kind of really all surrounding, right? And they need to include in one way or the other important KPIs that every single department cares about as well. It's only then when it can actually, work together, the team, to actually bring it forward. Now, in the context of European Parliament, right, what did we end up doing? Well, first of all, again, it seems like a very simple site. It has 138 different websites that in some way or the other connected with the European Parliament, right? And we ended up kind of just creating some very simple principles. Some maximum clarity, minimum errors. Simple, sensible, predictable, no relevant or redundant input. Give people a way out, especially very important with disabled buttons, for example, which usually just block people altogether. Provide understanding, no slowdowns, and in general, clarity is more important than aesthetics. So we went out and started doing research, right? And what we realized is, well, these are the most important things that the public is doing on the European Parliament website. I mean, I don't know how many of you have attended or visited the European Parliament website, but there are people who are coming to the site, and these are the things that they do. And this is a full list. It has 64 items on that list, right? And all of them have been then voted. So we get a group of people, and they get to decide, users of those sites, they get to decide which of these tasks are the most important ones. And they vote, right? And we got a lot of votes here. And as a result, right, we know now which are the top tasks, right? And then once we do know these top tasks, we get to sorting. And the way it works is we say, okay, well, let's pick the 30 most important ones, which also need to be decided with our colleagues and all, right? And then let's do the task sorting. That means just, getting 15 to 30 people to independently sort this task into groups. And it looks pretty much like this, right? We just group things, and then we give names to those groups. And these groups then are going to be represented in navigation. You might wonder at this point, why am I talking about this? Right? You will see in a moment how it all comes together, right? And a few patterns that we can use along the way as well. So we group them, we name them, right? And what you see on the right are kind of just some, ideas about this is how we could call it, or this is how we could call it, and so on and so forth, right? With the end goal to get to 80 to 90% success of people who are looking for something and then being able to do those things, right? And the way we do this is every 4 to 6 months, we come up with a set of task constructions that they need, well, the users need to complete, right? And we track and monitor just how fast they do it, do they encounter any issues, and so on and so forth. And these are the questions like this. It's a very typical thing that people will be doing on this site. Find out about the latest legislation on GDPR, find out about existing subsidies in Eastern Europe due to COVID-19, and so on and so forth, right? And we keep repeating this over and over every 4 to 6 months, right? With the hope that the design will be kind of moving in the direction that can give me some results about evidence that something is working better than something than what we had before, right? And usually we'll be creating this kind of dashboards as well, where we kind of pick some of the most important of those top tasks, right? And we them to not apply, we kind of measure and study just how well are we performing in there, right? Over time, right? Okay, this sounds like a little bit too abstract, but this has been very, very important for me because otherwise it's been very, very difficult to even prove that I'm doing anything meaningful in such a complex environment. But this is just one part of the story. This is just the process, and I'm happy to kind of chat about it more and maybe show you some things from the work that I've been doing in the Q&A later. But another thing that I was able to test were some of the useful patterns that we can then apply to our designs to make sure that I'm always boosting my KPIs, right? One thing is to define the KPIs first, and then everything I'm doing, every single pattern I'm applying, I'm always looking at it through the lens of these design KPIs because I need to improve them. And one thing that is going to happen quite a bit in any kind of system like this is that we're going to have complex menus, complex systems, right? It could be mega drop-downs, it could be mega click menus, whatever. You will end up with a situation where you need a lot of nesting. Many of you, I'm sure, have been in a situation like this, where you just want to travel to one of the subsections and off you go. You kind of force through this tunnel. In order to get there, you need to get through, this part, and then off you go, your focus is lost and you have to start all over again. I'm pretty sure that most of you had this experience as well in the past. And very, very typical for any kind of complex system as well. This is thesaurus.com, and I love the website, but I hate it so much because every single time I have to go to the search box, I'm being interrupted by this hover menu mega drop down. I don't really even want to see at all, right? It's just really frustrating. And I think that we know how to deal with this at this point. We've learned this in the past. Well, we're just going to have a little kind of delay, right? So we're just delaying the interaction kind of show up of that mega menu. And then every time we hover over one of the items, right, the other sub item is appearing with a delay. Technically, yes, this would work, but it causes other problems because every time I want to use the navigation, now I have to wait until that navigation appears, right? And the one thing that can be really helpful, and I mean, I feel almost stupid always saying that, replace these hover menus with click menus. This is exactly the same pattern, just no problems at all. I've seen people struggling so much with mega menus on hover, and they struggle not at all with this kind of click menus. That's probably going to be the very, very first thing that we're going to do, right? In fact, you can even take it all the way to the next level, because one thing we could do as well is to say, why don't we have sort of a click-through menu? So we have multiple levels, right? Maybe on 2, 3, 4 levels, right? And then every time you click on one of the sections, you can again get people to another level, right? To level 4 at this point, right? Or here's another one, again, where we have one section, have another section, have a third section. This gives us one very important, very kind of critical advantage, because now what we can say is at every single page in a legacy application, right, I can give people access to top tasks, to the most important things, which they can reach within a couple of clicks. Right, that's really important. That's really dramatic, right? Because you can tell that everyone who needs to do something that people usually do on the European Parliament website, right? For example, they should be able to get to this task, these top tasks, within 4 taps on every single page, and there are thousands and thousands of them, right? And of course, we can also go a little bit further, because we could say, depending on the role that you have, right, we might have different tabs for our mega menu, which also opens then on click, right? So if you are an internal user, you might be using one navigation, and if you're an external user, you'll be using another one, right? Okay, so that's something we can do. That's actually really, really useful in many ways when you want to kind of deal in this kind of environment. The other thing that shows up quite a bit, and I think that we don't pay a lot of attention to it, is sidebar navigation. We usually think that, what's a big deal? You just have some navigation in the sidebar. But if you actually pay attention to the navigation and how people interact with it, you'll spot a lot of usability and accessibility issues. So this is the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland website, right? I'm sure that you visit this kind of websites all the time. I do. I love those kind of websites. So what you do here, what you see here, and this is another important KPI that we're kind of working with. I want users to be able to navigate within the sidebar or between the different sections on the page without being slowed down. But when I look at the site here, I'm always slowed down. Every single click, I'm always going to be slowed down. Why? Well, because whenever I'm using the sidebar navigation and I'm clicking, let's say, in one of the sections here, right, I am being dropped to the very top of the page. And the first 42%, I measured, 42% of the screen is nothing useful for me. There's nothing valuable at all. So every time I use the sidebar navigation, I have to scroll down to actually start using it. Sometimes it gets to extremes. So this is a University of Gothenburg website from Sweden. 86% of the entire first screen is dedicated to navigation and illustration, right? So if I do want to learn and study how to apply for my master's program, I have to scroll on a large screen, the entire screen, in order to get there, right? And if I am actually using this side-by-side sort of sidebar navigation, it's kind of the same story. So every time, approximately 80% of the screen is dedicated to something that I don't even find that valuable, really. Well, maybe the image is important, no question about that, but maybe it shouldn't be as big. So one KPI that we introduced was, how big is the amount of content that we're displaying relatively to the rest of the page? If it's actually below 60, we should redesign, right? And that's something that publishers also know. So whenever they publish, they know, okay, we need to keep in mind that at least 60% of the entire screen should be content, right? It's not always viable, it's not always possible, but it's just something to keep in mind again, right? And of course, one thing we shouldn't be forgetting is whenever you have any kind of sidebar navigation, it has to stay consistent. So as you're navigating a page, you need to be able to kind of keep navigating it over time as you go through the different sections within the sidebar. So here on ADAC, you have even the sticky bar and things like that here on the top. But the moment you start clicking around in the sidebar navigation, you end up on another page which does not have a sidebar navigation anymore, right? And then you have to go back in order to move forward. And I want to avoid that. I want to avoid a situation where you always have to go back in order to move forward. That's, again, one of the KPIs we defined. We should not have any kinds of slowdowns. So what do we do instead? Maybe this. Admittedly, not as exciting as previous examples, but if you measure the amount of time people need in order to explore everything around master's degree in English, it's 4 times faster. 4 times faster, right, compared to what we saw in the previous example. And that counts, again, one of the KPIs that we have defined, right? It doesn't have to look like this, of course. Here's one from the Statistics of Sweden website, where you also do have this notion of kind of moving between sidebar navigation and no sidebar navigation, right? But again, whenever you're moving in between, right, even going into kind of nested levels, there is a significant amount of content appearing right away. One thing you could even do is to allow people to collapse this global navigation and to make space for the content that we have here, right? So what would be my reference example for sidebar navigation? Actually, Stripe's documentation is really, really great. So everything is right there in a way. You have decoupled the sidebar navigation from the view of the page, right? You also can collapse the sidebar navigation on the left. You also have this on this page tab where you can really jump to an important section on that page, and you never slow down at all. And I think that this is actually quite important, right? Talking about never being slowed down, just another final thing about navigation. Drive people to relevance. How do we reduce time to relevance, right? And you can almost feel that I'm being obsessed by these KPIs at this point, because every decision we're making has to be justified. It has to be based on evidence. It can't just be a random decision, right? So I was thinking that what if we add some sort of an additional layer to our navigation, which would be called a navigation query. Very often we rely on search, just performing the task. And if aliens came to Earth, they would be confused why we're operating this very strange paradigm where we have top 10 search results or top 20, and that's it. Shouldn't we be driving people towards answers rather than actually just showing search results, right? And in fact, there is an ongoing joke that, there have been more people to the Mount Everest tip than people who actually ended up on the 10th page of Google search, right? And that's probably the case. So maybe we should be driving people towards the answer rather than just giving them everything. When you look into mega drop-down navigation, we just give them everything. You look into sidebar navigation, we just give them everything. But shouldn't it be more like this? You have your navigation, you have your search, but additionally to that, just ask people what the intent is. What do you want to do here? Well, I'm here to learn about work benefits. Or maybe I'm here to borrow for school. Okay, for what? For my undergraduate degree, or maybe for my MBA. Okay, where? BYU. All right, get started. You never have to use navigation. You never have to use search. You answer a couple of questions and you're being driven to the relevant page. Again, the time to relevance here is massively higher compared to navigation we would usually have with a mega dropdown, right? It depends, of course, on the labeling and if you actually cover all the options in there. But I would encourage you to test and consider this as an option indeed, right? Here's another one from a public service in Düsseldorf in Germany. And you're kind of asking, what do you want to do? I want to make an appointment. Where do you want to make an appointment? Here. Okay. Oh, for what would you like to make an appointment? Here we go. There is an answer right there. It's kind of more of an information system or data system rather than actually navigation or search. And I think that this is actually quite valuable in many different contexts. Here is one from an e-commerce site in Germany, right? You are on the front page. Most of us will be expecting sort of a carousel on the homepage or tons of products, and they do have that as well, right? But the first thing that you have is this box on the left. What do you want to do here? I want to buy a washing machine. What kind? Front loader. All right, how big should it be? Big. All right, here we go. Time to relevance, again, very, very high here. So that's incredible. And I think that we should be operating, again, exploring this as an option a little bit more than we do in the past, right? Or did in the past. Another thing that's actually quite remarkably important, and it shows up in tests as being incredibly successful, is the notion of sideways breadcrumbs. We usually think about breadcrumbs being this really boring thing, essentially just leaving the traces of where the user has been, and then they can go back, right? But what if they also could go forward? So how could we do that? Well, normally when you think about breadcrumbs, it will be something like this, especially on mobile. We're just wrapping, right? We're just wrapping here and here and here, right? Or maybe we're just showing one item at a time, right here or right here. You can always go back, but you just go back to the previous page. And sometimes you can see some implementations trying a little bit to kind of improve things, but then it gets a little bit difficult to use, a little bit unclear maybe. Like what exactly does it say? Like there are a couple of few errors and arrows over here. Then you get this where you have kind of this stuff, and then you also have look for statistics with a button, well, with the arrow on the left, and then the back with an arrow pointing to the left, and then sub navigation as well. What does it mean? Who knows? That's going to require a little bit of effort to decipher what it means. Now, the first thing you can do, of course, is to add an accordion to your breadcrumbs. That always works. So whenever you have this dot in between indicating that there is something in there, it's probably a good idea to have a drop down or something indicating that there is something in there. You click and then it expands and shows you the full path. All right, that's fine. But once I embarked on a journey through ADAC and I found this, and I was actually very confused because I didn't understand, oh, wow, what is this actually? So you have this little drop down on the top where you can select siblings of the current page, right? So rather than actually having to go back in order to go forward or use a mega navigation on the top, right? You're basically using this sideways breadcrumbs over here. The only thing that I'm missing is maybe this chevron that could be probably displayed over here. But once I saw this, my life changed forever. I couldn't sleep one entire night and I thought, shouldn't we be using it all the time and everywhere? Actually, and once you start looking around, there are some sites actually doing that already. So here in Düsseldorf city again, right, you click in the middle, and then you can go to the siblings on that level. And then you go to a Swiss data science competence center in Switzerland, and they're doing that as well, right? Kind of, you can go very quickly to all the different levels, and that's remarkable. That's exactly how you can navigate forward without actually having to go back, given where you are at a given in the hierarchy of the site, which is a massive speed up. Another massive speed up is decoupling filters and filtering to give users a better way to provide accurate input. This is an experience of my life. I don't know about you, but I have this problem all the time. Filtering is such a critical feature in all kind of complex environments that we've covered so far, right? And what happens most of the time is you click around, right? And you click around, and I click around, and then accidentally, all of a sudden there is a refresh, and maybe only one of the items that I have selected is being registered. That's a horrible UX for filtering. So if you do this in your UI, you shouldn't be expecting people, filtering a lot. Here's another example of the same problem, slightly different context, right? Where here you have all the different brands, and every time you click and select one of the items, right, the entire UI freezes. and you have to wait. And then you have to scroll down again in order to explore other filters. But normally, people actually study and explore and use filters from top to bottom. So every time you actually have to use the filters, you have to scroll down and then wait. And then you have to scroll down and wait. That's a very, very painful experience. So one thing we definitely need to do, well, we need to decouple the filters and search, right? Which means whenever you go and use filters, click anywhere you like, click as much as you like, open accordions, close accordions, whatever you want. But because we decouple the views or the results from the filters, right, we're never slowed down at all. We never have to scroll down either. So it's not like we're going to be driven to the top of the page and then we have to go down, right? We just keep going. Plus, when you look at search results, they're not just links to pages, they're exposing important and relevant content on that particular for that particular result as well. Plus, you also get this search filter as well. For me, this is a really great reference example for any kind of filtering. And if you don't have a horizontal, a vertical sidebar space, one thing you can do as well is this, which is galaxies. And in galaxies, you don't have this notion of kind of making people refresh the page or wait or anything like that. Instead, when you pay attention to how it works, you go ahead, you select a filter, you have an overlay. It shows you on the button just how many products you're expecting. You click on the products, and it's only then when the new data is coming in from the server, right? So that's remarkable. That works really, really well, right? You're never waiting, you never slow down, you don't see a lot of kind of friction happening in the back, just exactly how it should be. That's a great way for filtering, right? And if you have a lot of forms, there is another pattern that I highly encourage you to try, right? Which is coming from another project I was involved with when we actually had to transform print forms into digital journeys, right? And you might have, let's say, in this kind of environment, I don't know, 15 PDFs. Each of them might have 6 to 8 pages, and all of them have to kind of work in a digital journey. So you could actually have sort of a task list pattern or dashboard-like experience, which would look like this, right? You break everything down into tasks. And groups, right? So you say basically, all right, so this is section 1, section 2, section 3. These are all the things you have to do, right? You always can return to this page, right? You also get this overview of how many steps you already have passed, right? And you also get the statuses or badges for every individual step, right? So if you have a complex form, like a multi-step or multi-page form, right? Where you have like maybe more than 6 or 7 steps, that's a great way of kind of dealing with this. So everybody can just, whenever they open one of the tasks, they can keep going and continue and then actually finish the form if they want to. But at any point of time, they can save and return later to their task list, right? And individual tasks can look quite simple in that case, right? And actually really just be relatively easy to manage. So this is the thing that I learned, right? If you have very complex beasts, breaking down into smaller pieces, which are actually added up, make up even for maybe more complexity, right? Do work really, really, really well, right? And finally, I do have to mention the beast. I know I'm a little bit behind the timing here, but there is this beast, and we need to talk about this: infinite scroll. I know that many of you are not big fans of infinite. Make you fall in love with infinite scroll again at this point, just because indeed it seems to be working fairly well in some environments, especially in e-commerce. Why and how would we make it work? Well, if you think about the options, well, what do we have? We have the pagination, right? We have the infinite scroll, where you keep scrolling and you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, 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 and you never hit the footer. And you keep scrolling and you scroll and you scroll and you keep going, and good luck, and maybe eventually you will hit the footer. But there is no notion of the state. You cannot send a link to yourself, right? For example, to continue later. There is no way to really hit the footer quickly. You cannot stop and continue later. You have to go through everything again, right? Not to mention tons of performance accessibility issues that go with that. And sometimes URL doesn't change, long story, right? But then there is another option, right? Which is something that you have seen before probably as well, which is the load more button. So you have this list of items, and as you start scrolling, eventually it shows you, okay, you've seen this many products, and you can load more products if you want to see them. And so I started playing with this and started testing just what could be working a bit better. Because at this point, yeah, surely we can click on load more and we can see more products, but I still don't have all the benefits I would like to have. Like I cannot send a link to myself and so on and so forth, right? And so the idea was, okay, what if we did this, right? Continue browsing later, plus you could win a $350 gift card. So you type in your email address, and we're sending you a link to continue later, right? And you can load more products if you want to. So this gives us one unique opportunity to send somebody an email, to get somebody's good email address, hopefully, right? Because they could win something as well. And they can continue later, right? Another thing that could be quite interesting is just have sort of a bookmark experience. Maybe people should be able to say, I want to continue here later. We'll remember where they are, right? And then every time, next time they go to the page, we can prompt them to continue from where they left off, right? There are plenty of ways of how we could do this, of course. It could also be in a pop-up and so on, right? You can also just allow people to copy a link to this position in the list as well, right? Which could be quite reasonable too, right? But you can also do something slightly different. If you did want, with infinite scroll, to give people access to footer, we have sticky header. Why don't we have sticky footer, right? So as you start scrolling down here on Damakan, which is a Malaysian food delivery service, you actually have a sticky footer. You can always open it. You can always close it. So it's not a problem anymore, right? But you might say, well, okay, but then how do I navigate between the different states of my infinite scroll? Well, for this, there is a wonderful example from pepper.pl, which is basically combining pagination, infinite scroll, and to some degree, load more button as well. How does it work? The moment you start scrolling and you actually get to a particular amount of items, particular threshold, right? They show you this little bar, which kind of allows you to jump to the top. It allows you to open the footer, and also allows you to navigate between the pages, right? So if you pay attention on the top, and as you start scrolling, the URL changes from page equals 3 to page equals 4, right? So it's infinite scroll combined with pagination with a sticky footer that solves most of the issues that infinite scroll has. And very often, infinite scroll can work really, really well just because we're exposing people to a large variety of products, and we never slow them down. And again, this is one of the KPIs that I have as well. And the very, very final one, if you do this, consider also this one, which I think is also something that's very underestimated. Scroll bar range intervals, right? It's becoming a little bit more popular recently, but the idea is, doesn't matter what kind of system you have. In the end, if you have a lot of filters and you have a lot of products, you will end up with a complex system. But if you want to allow people to navigate more comfortably, one thing that we need to keep in mind is whenever they actually explore this data set, they first need to get to a comfortable range. That happens usually by filters. And once they use filters, they then sort, right? Sometimes they will be searching beforehand, right? So why don't we make it a little bit nicer or easier for users? For example, like this. So if people are sorting by price, why don't we show labels for the price right here next to the scroll bar, right? So you can go ahead, if you're using infinite scroll, and allow people to just jump to 115 immediately. Wouldn't it be better than just showing everything from all the way from 0 to, I don't know, 500? Because then you actually end up with a problem. If you have, let's say, pagination, why would somebody want to click on page number 6? This would be probably just a guess, right? Maybe there is something in there. But if you give people some hint or some clue what kind of pricing is expected there, well, maybe that would work better. It doesn't have to be price, right? It could also be if you can order anything, and if you're sorting anything in some way by ratings, reviews, or anything like that, you can actually show the stars or show the letters of the alphabet, whatever might be useful. It's just a little bit of helper that really drives you forward and helps you get to the, to where you want to be, right? Can I show just one more thing? Maybe. I hope I don't steal the show here. Maybe I'm just going to just one final thing, and then we're definitely done. And that's related to data tables. This is something for all of us who are using a lot of filters, right? I mean, I've seen so many filters in my life. I think I've seen enough, right? We know that when it comes to enterprise applications, there is always this combination of filtering, sorting, and search. And very often, it's actually quite difficult to get right. So when we're looking into things like this, right? Really complex systems like this, one thing that's actually quite common is that when you start exploring this, there is rarely, and I really want to emphasize that, there is rarely a necessity to bring this table in the same way to mobile. It's just not going to work well on mobile, right? Because very often what you see is people are going to use a table in a particular way. It's either that they're kind of exploring multiple columns at a time with some data points, or they're exploring multiple rows at a time with some multiple attributes, which kind of then scattered over the columns, right? And we kind of need to support both situations, both use cases. And there are two simple patterns for this. If you want to allow people to navigate between the columns, right, we use a drop-down and cards, right? If you want to allow people to drill down in a particular row, right, we then switch to card view. That's it. No table needed, right? So that's pretty neat. It actually works remarkably reliable, right? However, if you do have a lot of filters like this, what do we do, right? Where do we even start here? Well, at this point, the only thing that we can do is try to break this massive amount of filters we have in the middle into something that's more manageable. And this is where, again, some sort of a click-through menu would work, right? Where we have a filter button, and then we allow people to click and kind of go through some buttons or some areas, maybe like this, right? Where we kind of show it all, right? But we just show it differently. Or maybe like this, right? Where we have this kind of search for filters, and then we have the tabs on the left here. They could also be on the top. And then every time you select one, you kind of get to the buttons right here, where you can actually specify what filters you're looking for. Right. A very good example of that, and then I'm done, really, is this one, Financial Times, where they have all of those things that we actually saw previously, but they're much better organized. So we get the different tab views, and we have the different symbols, and we'll also have this kind of search autocomplete for whatever it is that's interesting for us or important for us, but also have this equity screener. But instead of showing all filters immediately, right, you just choose in a range of click-through menus what is it or what kind of filters you find important or interesting for you, right? As accordions with tabs. So as you click through, you kind of keep selecting them, right? And this is actually exactly the same amount of data that we saw in the very first screen, but just broken down in a much, much more convenient way, right? No surprise, it's not surprising that this is probably going to be used much more, right? And also, whenever you have this kind of complex environment, thinking about presets and predefined screens, things like that could be very, very useful, of course, as well, right? So, and then what do we do on mobile? Kind of the same story, right? Where you kind of have either a couple of accordions here, right, which you can open and close, or you basically have this horizontal layering where you have the first filter and you can add another filter, kind of sort of a query constructor, if you like, right? So that seems to be working fairly well. All right, now to wrap up. When it comes to complex systems, I think that the one thing that I learned, that many things that I was believing in don't really work in enterprise or in complex environments. White space is a little bit overrated, maybe in, not overrated, but is not used as much as I hope it would be, because sometimes when you're dealing with expert users, they want to see a lot of data, right? One important thing though, and that was kind of a major takeaway for me, nobody trusts me, right? Nobody trusts me coming in such a large environment, thinking that I know the things and I know how it's going to work. I always have to kind of prove it. And to prove it, I have to think about evidence-based decisions. And I have to establish healthy quality metrics that can be moved with better design, right? Because in the end, when you look at the data and you look at big players like Airbnb and so on, good design is usually, well, always almost, good for business because it reduces errors, reduces cost, produces quality output, but it can only work once you establish this kind of design KPIs or evidence-based decision-making process in place, right? This is what's absolutely required for this to happen. Now, I hope that there was some useful insights for you in there. I'm always happy to get any kind of questions. I'm happy to give any kind of answers that I can provide. And if there is something I can help to you now or later, please don't hesitate to contact me. I love this kind of challenges, and I love playing with all kind of really complex interfaces. And also, we like cats. So meow, and thank you so much for listening.
Meow to you too.
Excellent.
Thank you very
Now
much.
back.
Vitaliy, it was a real pleasure to listen to your speech. Among lots of things which I like about stuff you make on Smashing Magazine, maybe the most I love tons of examples, tons of practical examples you
agree.
always provide with visual representation. That's really
I agree.
great.
I hope everyone was taking notes because I know I surely did. And I'm not even a designer. And all the things, all the topics that you covered, they are so reliable, all the pains. And I'm happy to hear that there are indeed solutions to it. So we'll be using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the important thing is at this point that many things that we stop kind of experiencing every day, we take it for granted and we just assume that this is how it is, right? Like I've seen so many interfaces doing exactly the same thing with filters, and I've seen people struggling massively in back systems, in I don't know, any kind of healthcare. This is literally slowing people down, and this is critical. I mean, these are critical applications. These are not just, I don't know, checklist applications that we design for the web, which are of course also cool and all. But when it comes to healthcare, we absolutely have to boost the performance of people who are using those interfaces. We cannot just do something because we feel like it. And so this has been kind of my journey. And I'm very happy that, I hope at least, that some of those things will be useful for wonderful people watching this today.
Totally. And I believe that you should have tons of questions out there in chat from our audience.
Yes, I do see 6 questions, and I'm going to just go through them, right?
Let's do that.
Excellent. Maybe I can also show a few more slides then, now that I have the questions. So one question is, how did you manage to find such a big variety of different examples? I see that they're in different languages. Is it from real life experience or target search exact example? Yeah, so usually based on the project I'm going to have, I go and hunt. And that usually means if I'm working in an insurance company, for an insurance company, right, I'm going to explore any kind of insurance companies out there, and then basically translate with Google Translate into German, into French, into Chinese, into Spanish, into all kinds of languages, just to see what the experience is like over there. It's basically really very much based on every project. So just because I was working with a couple of insurance companies, I was working with the government projects, I was working with a few commercial web form builders, right? It's always been a journey, because very often in this kind of environments, you end up with this very similar situations. It's either complex navigation, or it's complex filtering, or it's complex search, or everything combined, right? And so it's very much a deliberate research. And not necessarily from all the projects, of course, that I was working on. There are many, many, many examples that I kind of spotted, right? But that requires a lot of signing up, a lot of playing with trials, making sure that I'm not going to be charged by the end of the month, just because I usually do get some sort of a standard plan or something. So a virtual card is a very good idea. I highly recommend it. And most importantly, not clicking on buttons you don't understand. That's something that I learned when I ordered a bicycle from Japan, which I could not return for some reason. So that was very surprising. We could talk about this later. Why is Airbnb so beautiful and convenient, but booking a similar project seems so complicated? I think there is this notion that I think I just want to bring up here, which I would highly encourage you to use as well. Because when we think about design, it's often seen as almost unnecessary at times, right? But again, coming back to design KPIs, one thing that I always bring up is this particular person, Noriyuki Kano. He's a professor of engineering, was a professor of engineering in the University of Tokyo. He's very much known to our fellow developers and software engineers, I'm sure, because he spent most of his life dedicating to what the quality of how to represent the quality of the product and how to ensure that it kind of evolves well over time. So he came up with this chart, which is kind of mapping the customer satisfaction against product function. And of course, most of the time when I look at companies that I'm working with, they'll be competing against other companies in terms of features. We are fast, we are secure, we have a pricing point that works, and all these things, which is very much important. Don't get me wrong, right? But this is what you often see companies kind of competing against. This requires a lot of development. This requires a lot of effort, a lot of money needs to be spent in order to make this work, right? But of course, when you think about the customers, they have this threshold attributes, like if it's some sort of healthcare application, you need to be able to make an appointment, to add new patients, and so on and so forth, right? So that's an expectation. but also they will be expecting this to be performing fairly well and be more or less usable, but you don't get people to this level of excitement that you can do with design. These excitement attributes are the reason why people tend to stay with one particular system, why they feel like the system is working, right? So design, as it turns out, usually lives somewhere over here. You don't need to spend that much time on development sometimes, because you can also play with things like labels and wording and microcopy and things like that. I mean, it can be very expensive, but it doesn't have to be. So what many companies realized in the last 10 years is that design compared to development, continuous development, by the way, right? Kind of, this is an ongoing journey because everybody else is getting better too, right? But design, comparatively to it, relatively speaking, is a little bit more affordable and cheaper. I know that many of you might be working still in a company where you have maybe, I don't know, 2-3 designers in a multi-thousand, with a company with multiple thousands of co-workers, right? That's usually a sign that the company, of course, is not design driven, and it's very much technical or very much feature driven. That can work, right? But if you do invest more into design, and that's what Airbnb, for example, was doing from the very start, you get to this very high level of customer satisfaction. So if something else comes up, right, another company like Airbnb comes up, it's going to be quite difficult to bring somebody who is using or has been using Airbnb and loves and enjoys the user experience to that other product. So it's a very big hurdle, right? So while many companies really think about this performance, what they don't think about is if there is another company that provides a relatively similar set of features with relatively similar pricing, because pricing is usually very crucial, these people will be easy to jump. This is why, for example, for me, personally, I don't have anything against Uber, right? But if there was another service which I knew was, I don't know, following ethical principles, or had a similar pricing model, right, or had maybe had a slightly nicer interface, I'd probably jump right away. I don't care if it's Uber or if it's Lyft or anything else. I just really don't care that much, right? So the jump would be almost immediate, right? But with Airbnb, somebody has to really convince me to move away from Airbnb, right? And that's something that many companies don't understand. Design can be much cheaper than development. Let's imagine that we have some functionality, and when we need to start it, we press a button. Usually it works instantly, but sometimes it could take some time. In this case, if we want to show cancel button, when is it better to show it? Yeah, so one thing that we need to kind of think of, do we need to initiate preloading of items all the time immediately? Because of course, many interfaces are like that. If you change something in the filter somewhere, right, especially when you have that in the sidebar, you will be expecting the results to appear immediately. But I would try and test what happens if we actually don't do that. If we actually have the manual apply button, then we probably will not even need the cancel button anyway, right? However, if you do want to automatically update, which is also a reasonable use case to consider, what I would say is whenever the data is coming, right, whenever you either freezing the UI or whatever it is that you're using in that particular case, you need to keep that cancel button available at all times, right? I don't think that it's probably a good idea to hide it. Maybe you could actually start displaying it after a particular threshold or timeout. So if you realize that you cannot get enough data to show the results within 5 seconds or so, then you can actually cancel it, right? But then maybe we could design from the start in a way that we do not block the entire UI, but only the search results view, right? So again, this decoupling can be very, very helpful in order to make sure that people can still use the rest of the interface, right? And not have to wait for the UI to come back. I hope I answered your question. How do you know you need accessibility support at the AAA level in complex systems? When it's Facebook, we have big audience and some of them could have some disabilities, but when it's a professional system, how to create everything not damage to majority? Well, first of all, sometimes these are the requirements that come to me rather than me defining them. When it comes to public services, European Parliament being, of course, one of them, has to be fully compliant, AAA compliant, no questions about that. It's just a given, right? When you have to pick up your battles, very often it is going to be, again, decided not by me, right, but by somebody who is in a senior management or somebody who is kind of managing this particular site or the particular project. They will be relying on the legal recommendations that are coming from other departments. And if I'm being very honest, very often I feel like I cannot change much except for things that I have the freedom of. But every time I do that, I also need to be very strategic about what I'm doing and how do I kind of propose certain things. So I would never come and say, we should be doing this or we should be doing that because it's going to look nicer, right? Or I never say we should be doing something at all. Instead, what I tell is, well, maybe we could improve this business KPI, or maybe we could reduce cost over here, or maybe we could improve efficiency in that department, or maybe we could potentially even boost the productivity of this team on the other end of the pipeline that we have for our product with a bit of design. Can we do that? Can I get it to try? Then usually I will be asked, just what is your expectation? And if I can say, well, maybe we can improve it by 10%, 15%, right? This is just guesstimate from my end. How can I know, right? But I can measure, based on my experience, that if I change this mega monster of a filter, with just plenty of drop downs, right? If I can change from that to this click-through menu, where people just basically click on buttons rather than having to open a drop-down menu and then choose and then move on to the next drop-down menu, right? I know that from my experience, I can definitely speed up people by 50 to 60%, right? So I can say 10%, 15% productivity boost. That's something, right? If you accumulate it over a year, that's really remarkable. Like if you can just, I don't know, handle 1 more case a day or 5 more cases a day, that's something that really translates to money. So I basically always try to translate my design to KPIs that will help managers who are going to basically manage me or who kind of have their own priorities, of course, reach their goals better or reach better and higher KPIs as well. Because most of the time, what I need to understand is I'm not hired by senior management. I'm hired by design leads who then propose to bring me in here to senior management, but then I have to provide results for senior management, right? So on the one hand, I actually do work with my managers, my design leads or my development leads, right? And we're kind of working on things and so on, but I absolutely need to provide evidence that I'm worth it, right? Not because I'm so expensive, by the way, just because if this person, this is what I usually get when I'm actually on the calls, right? We should not screw up that project, right? Do not screw up that project. Like, no pressure, like at all, right? Because most of the time, these people who hire me, they have to obviously report to people higher up, right? And because it's kind of an investment, they might be in trouble if I don't do my job right, right? So I always try to kind of leap jump almost, where I think about, okay, can you tell me what are some of the important KPIs and metrics that the management, the senior management cares about, right? This would be usually related to finances, costs, efficiency, things like that. How do you understand design-driven approach? Well, with design-driven, I mean that ideally, of course, we will not be living in the waterfall world. We will be living in some sort of agile world. I would rather say maybe just an overlap world. If you work in waterfall, sure. Maybe one thing you can do though, just to move slightly towards a little bit more agile, to avoid this phase where you have the development stage and then, you have the design stage and then off you go handing it over to the developers and then you have a development stage and then you have a QA stage, right? Instead, have this overlaps, maybe just one day, maybe in a sprint, right? Maybe just a few hours within a sprint. So designers and developers talk to each other and kind of discuss what exactly is supposed to happen, rather than just sending it via email or putting it on a Jira board, right? And also another thing that really helps for design-driven approach is this is establishing the culture of design in organizations small and large, right? This is basically about what it is about. It's about people understanding that design is helping, right? In the same way, like, of course, development is helping, but they really need to work together, right? And so with those little things that I showed today, like even those little tiny design patterns, you can have tremendous results very quickly, right? Like tremendous results that can be applicable and can be working even within, I don't know, years, right? And so what I tend to do also is whenever it comes to QA, usually QA is very much development driven, and you have your Cypress testing going and you have maybe your, I don't know, Selenium tests and so on. I try to sprinkle a little bit of UX QA, right? UX QA in the QA department. So they get the sense of what is a good design, what is a bad design. And I'm not talking to, of course, about them having to be designers, right? But we have kind of this flow charts that we're creating. Maybe I can just briefly show it very, very quickly here. Okay, flow chart. Flow chart. I think I'll have to find it a little bit later, I'm afraid. But this is basically just a decision-making tree. So if you design this way, right? If you have, let's say, for example, for forms, how do we pick if it's a radio button or if it should be a select menu or anything else? This would be a flow chart that will look like this. Lift, segmented, control, flow chart. Here we go. This will look something like this. And this is something that we're creating for every single, trying to create for every single project, right? Like this. So I can see, all right, here we go. That means now QA can say, okay, I'm going to go for this tree. And for a given component, I can say, you know, should it be a dropdown? Should it be segmented control, right? So this is always kind of a part of the journey as well, right? I know that I'm just about to finish in here. So one last thing I do want to show, just if I can, please, just how it all fits together. And that would be the last one, right? Because this is just experiments and this is no official, so please don't take it seriously by any means. But we've seen a lot of things today, right? About the navigation and about the work and the KPIs and so on. This is kind of the work that I've been doing for the European Parliament so far. And essentially, when you look at this, again, remember this top tasks, right? So this is me kind of playing with these ideas of top tasks right here. And we have all these different things that people do on the European Parliament website, and they get labels. And of course, these labels then have to be translated into sort of navigation, and they are. So we get this, right, where everything is listed according to the top tasks, that are the most important things or pages that people are exploring on the site, right? From what we identified. And now the magical part, we're using this kind of click-through menu, right? So on every single page, on every single one of them, so it's probably going to look like this, right? Oh, maybe like this, right? With sideways breadcrumbs, by the way. In each of them, essentially what you can do is from every page, and there are thousands of them, right? You can go to every relevant top task page within seconds. That's not something you can do today, right? And that's measurable, right? I can measure the amount of time needed today and the amount of time needed with this. And that's, again, very much committed or confirming to the design KPIs that we defined earlier, right? Because all of this is defined around what people actually do or what they want to do on the European Parliament website. Right? And it just keeps going pretty much like this for many, many, many other pages that we have as well. The same goes also for mobile then too, right? That's another story. Ideally, that might be another thing for another day. If you can, do not hide everything behind the hamburger icon, because these items will never be discovered, many of them. So whenever you hide something, you better have a good reason why you hide it. Whenever something is important, there better be a good reason why it is important, right? And so it probably should be visible at all times. It's just about us finding a way of how to make it work. I think I'm way over time, and I can see that there are no more questions coming in. So please let me know if I should continue or not. I mean, I could really keep going forever. But
Well, I believe there will be like tons of questions, more and more coming, because you made such a great speech. Actually, personally, I'm swarmed by information.
I'm impressed as well.
Yeah, there's lots of things to digest there, and well,
thank you.
I'm losing my speech here.
I think that's the word that he's trying to find. Thank you.
Of course,
Yeah,
thank you so much for everyone.
yeah.
And
Thank you for
thank you so much for, yes, of course, and thank you so much for having me. And I have so many wonderful Ukrainian friends, and I just want to send a lot of heart, love, and support for everything that you're going through. This is, we will win.
Thank you. It means the
Thank
world
you so
to
much.
us.
Yeah, that really means a
Of
lot.
course. Of course. Thank you and bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again.